Hey students, Mark Ferrier here. This video is going to go over the close reading essay assignment. So when you've clicked on this assignment, this is the page you'll first come to. This video will be right here. And note that you have the option to go to a description, suggested processes, requirements, peer review, or grading. You can skip to any of those. So this video is just going to run through all of these in order. So close reading. Your basic task for the close reading here is to analyze a short text, fiction or nonfiction. This is one that you've chosen now, remember, in a close reading of 750 to 1250 words. So the key thing to remember here in close reading is that you are looking at very specific parts of the text and making very specific, detailed arguments, zeroing in on the text. All right, so not sort of broad blanket statements, but very specific readings that lead you to a very specific discussion and argument. All right, so that's your basic task, is this analysis of a text. The purpose, make a claim about the way a text's rhetorical features. These are all in the readings. The structural elements, cultural references, syntax, imagery, shape its theme. So if you've done the readings up until now, from up to now, you'll know what these are. If you haven't, make sure you go back and do all the readings that we've been assigned up until the close reading. So that's your purpose, is to make a claim. Now the why. Paying close attention to the text, you want to ask questions about it, make observations, and interpret these observations. So if you're trying to do an outline or thinking about, okay, where do I start? Start by asking questions. Then what are your observations? Then interpret those observations. So if you have 3 observations and 3 interpretations, you now have the beginning of an essay. So this is one way to get started here. So start thinking about, what do you notice? What's a possibility? What does it make you think of? Where can you investigate different rhetorical, structural, or cultural aspects? How's the author using syntax and imagery? And so on. Different ways, all different options for you to start thinking about, how can I write and begin this essay? So for developing and getting started, you first obviously need to choose a text. So here's the link for that. Reading options. I'll go over this again. If you click on that link, that will bring you to different options you can have for reading, essays and other nonfiction texts, short stories with a twist. I recommend you read a few of these and decide which one not only would work well for close reading for you, but also what appeals to you. All right, or you can challenge yourself. Let's say you haven't read that many romance or ghost stories and you want to. Then do that. Entirely up to you. And then here's a breakdown of those texts and links to those texts, okay? So once you've chosen your text, you want to use those reading skills to determine the main theme, idea, supporting details, organization of the text. So in order to be able to do this, you can go ahead and click on Reading Analysis Resources, and then here are some of the resources for you as a student to kind of go through and look at and think about how you can start to begin critically analyzing and close reading these texts. So if you picked a ghost story, here are some resources for ghost stories. Please, by all means, feel free to look through any of these resources and apply different ones to different styles and types and genres of reading. That's up to you. Now, one thing I'll note specifically is on this Reading Analysis Resources page, there is a guide to thesis statements, and we'll come back to that. But if you need to skip to any of these, so let's say you chose a ghost story, now you want to analyze and get some tips for analyzing ghost story, here are 3 different links. But I definitely recommend you look at different genres and different ways of organizing and thinking about approaching an analysis of a text, and do that by clicking on a few different ones of these, okay? All right, so once you've got those readings out of the way, you want to start to develop a thesis. So again, as a reminder, if you click back on this Reading Analysis Resources link, that will give you the option to go down. If you don't have a lot of experience with thesis, you click on Other Resources here, or you just scroll all the way down to the bottom and Other Resources. And here are a few different links for examples of how to get started with thesis statements. Please note that this one's a video. I've tried to put some information here in parentheses letting you know where it's from, but also use your own. If you know of a good website or a good online writing lab that gives you a good way to develop a thesis statement, feel free to use that. Here are 3 to kind of get you started. But that's what you want to do for this close reading essay. Now here are the steps. You've chosen your text, you've done some reading, you've got some skills here to identify main parts of the story that you chose here from part 1. Now you're going to start developing a thesis. The main thing about a thesis is it needs to be arguable. So you don't want to say something like, oh, this story was very well received during its time. That's a fact. And so what you want to think about, well, what's your argument. Why do you think it was well received? What's in it that is an observation you can make where you can critically analyze some of the rhetorical features, structural elements, and cultural references, and so on. So develop a draft thesis. For the final essay, you're going to need to write about 750 to 1250 words to support your claim. All right, so keep that word count in mind. That doesn't include a works cited page, introduction, a couple paragraphs, conclusion. That'll get you to 750 to 1250 words. All right, you do want to use examples from the text. All right, so you want to cite and do in-text citations. So make sure you're using quotes and pointing to very specific examples, because this will help you get to that theme of a close reading essay, right? That aspect of a close reading essay that we are working on. That's something you really want to make sure. When you make an argument or a claim about something, you can point to a very specific example in the text. All right, questions to consider. Here are some options. I'm not going to read through all of these. You can read these on your own. I think they're self-explanatory, but they give you kind of an idea of how to approach your close reading. For each of these, you do need to use examples and you need to specify. So if you're saying there's a meaning beneath or beyond the overall explicit message, then you need to say, what is it? How is it communicated? Why do you think it's there? And make an argument for that, right? And so get very specific here and do a close reading, not broad, general blanket statements. All right, so these are different options. Obviously, you wouldn't write on all of these. Pick one or maybe mix them up or find another way to access the text that goes beyond these. Absolutely fine, as long as you are meeting this purpose to make a claim about the way a text's rhetorical features, structural elements, cultural reference, syntax, and imagery shape its theme in an analysis of one of the readings that we have. All right, if you're doing that, you're golden. Okay, so that's the process part. That's how you get started with this. I'm going to scroll down here now for the requirements. Hopefully these are easy for you to understand. I'm not going to spend too much time in this video, but know that to fulfill your purpose, to meet that goal, you do need to write 750 to 1250 words. All right, that's going to include a thesis. Here are the things you'll be graded on: your thesis statement, your introduction, conclusion, well-organized and well-developed body paragraphs. All those are aspects of writing I will be looking at and that you need to meet and you need to work on in order to meet these requirements. All right, it must focus on the text as the main source, and then you need to consider the meaning of the text and interpretation of that text. Okay, your goal is to argue for your interpretation. That's a requirement here. You need to support those assertions with evidence. All right, and so this should focus closely on the text, detailed illustration. Make sure you have quotes, paraphrases, the occasional summary, and start explaining your illustrations and connect them back to the main idea, and importantly here, connect it back to the thesis. All right, the interpretation here, what I'm getting at is it needs to be complicated enough to allow for the rest of the text as well. All right, so you need to take into consideration what's this one part you're focusing on have to do with the rest of the story. All right, and you can start to do that through your analysis. Now make sure you do not give us an interpretation which then is directly contradicted by direct evidence from the text. All right, so you don't want to say something like, oh, this text doesn't really have any women in it, and therefore I'm going to write on how the absence of women creates a very specific reading. But if there is direct evidence in the text that the narrator or the main character is a woman, then obviously your reading would fall apart. Okay, and so this is what I mean here. Make sure that when you are giving us an interpretation that it aligns with the evidence of the text, or that you can demonstrate that evidence in the text. That's your job for the requirements. Okay, here's some things. Provide a very brief summary of the text before you start your analysis. This is when you start thinking about your outline. As you analyze the text in the body paragraphs, remember you might need to refer to certain details throughout the text from time to time. All right, do not give me a plot summary. All right, you can assume that I've read it, but an analysis of the meaning and text. You can give very brief summaries of this scene is located in this part of the text if you want, but overall we do not need a plot summary. All right, you can assume that the person reading this, me, has an understanding. If they don't, they can go and read that short fiction. All right, this is not a job to summarize. This is not a task where you're being asked to summarize the story. We want your analysis of the story. All right, there's several different interpretations. Try and look beyond the obvious. All right, so if we have a ghost story, you don't just want to say, oh, this story was meant to scare people. All right, if it's a ghost story, sure, but why was it meant to scare? In what way does it? In what ways does it not? Where's something that is unexpected for you that you can look into and interpret more. All right, you need to argue for the meaning of the text that you can support with that evidence that we've talked about so far. Make sure you give us the title and the text, the title and the author of the text in the introduction so we know right away what your essay is going to talk about. Here's a link for MLA review. If you click on that, that will bring you to a page for different aspects of MLA style that you need to work on and understand, right? You should have read these, so make sure you have a close understanding of MLA, that you're following those instructions and those requirements for MLA style. Make sure you proofread, and then down here there's a few other links, right? There's some examples for essays and sample outlines. I definitely recommend that you take a look at these to get an idea of what does a close reading look like and how can I begin by using this outline. All right, so that's the work that you're going to do for the close reading essay. And I'll just note, I'll talk about this more in the peer review assignment, but way down here at the bottom, after the requirements that we just talked about, here's a guide on how to peer review each other's drafts. All right, so you'll be writing a draft, and then down here is the guide that tells you all about how to work on the draft for peer review. And so you would just follow these instructions here, and you would use the instructions for the essay as a baseline, or the instructions for the essay, the close reading essay, as a baseline for how to approach that peer review, right? So does the essay present a brief and clear summary? Is there a clear and specific thesis? The requirements of this essay is to give a thesis. What should it specify? A close reading or analysis on what we talked about and what's listed here, right? That analysis of structural elements, rhetorical features, and so on. So at the bottom here, instructions for how to do peer review, but the rest of this video has went over how to complete and approach the close reading essay. So if you have questions about this close reading essay or anything else not covered in this video, let me know.